In the dusty frontier town of Black Rock, where justice often bowed to power, a young mother stands trembling before the gallows. The mayor, his face twisted with self-righteous fury, reads the charges. Bearing an illegitimate child, a crime. He claims, demands the ultimate punishment. The crowd watches in tense silence as the noose is prepared, some averting their eyes, others whispering prayers. But fate has other plans. A mysterious cowboy appears from nowhere, his weathered hands holding two items, the town's birth registry and a sealed letter from the deceased sheriff. The truth he's about to reveal will shake this town to its very foundation. What dark secret is the mayor desperately trying to hide beneath this public execution? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Black Rock cast long shadows in the fading light of day. The town, hewn from the Montana wilderness 30 years prior, had grown from a mining camp into a testament of frontier determination. Its buildings, weathered but proud, lined the main. Street-like sentinels of civilization, their wooden facades bearing witness to countless tales of triumph and tragedy. Mayor Theodore Burton stood at his office window, watching as the gallows took shape in the town square. His reflection in the glass revealed a man in his 60s, with steel-grey hair and eyes that had grown cold from decades of wielding power. The town registry lay open on his desk, its leather binding cracked with age, its pages yellowed by time. His fingers traced the careful script of births, deaths, and marriages that chronicled Black Rock's history. "Moral decay," he muttered, his voice thick with contempt. "We didn't build this town from nothing to see it destroyed by loose women and their bastard children." His hand closed around a glass of whiskey, knuckles white with barely contained fury. The door opened quietly, and Samuel Whitaker, his clerk of 20 years, entered with cautious steps. "Mayor Burton, the preparations are nearly complete." He hesitated, then added, "There's considerable talk among the townspeople. Some are saying this is, excessive." Burton's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Excessive? Tell me, Samuel, how many years have you watched me guide this town? How many times have my decisions been proven right?" He turned from the window, his shadow falling across the clerk like a physical weight. "Sarah Matthews isn't just a schoolteacher who got herself in trouble. She's a symbol of everything that threatens to unravel the fabric of decent society." Samuel's eyes dropped to the floor, unable to meet his employer's gaze. "Yes, sir. But she's well-liked, especially among the families whose children she teaches. And the child—" He trailed off as Burton's expression darkened. "The child is proof of her sin," Burton snapped, "a testament to her moral failing. We'll make an example of her, and others will think twice before they think to challenge the natural order of things." He moved to his desk, running his fingers over the town registry. "Besides, what's done is done. The gallows are built, the charges are filed, and come noon tomorrow, Black Rock will remember what happens to those who think themselves above our laws." Outside, the autumn wind whistled through the streets, carrying with it the sound of hammering from the town square. Sarah Matthews sat in her cell in the jailhouse, her infant son clutched to her breast. At 26, she had come to Black Rock 2 years ago, bringing with her degrees from back east and dreams of shaping young minds. Now, those dreams lay in ruins, shattered by circumstances she dared not explain. The late Sheriff James Cooper's Deputy Thomas Hayes approached her cell with a bowl of thin soup. His young face was drawn with concern. "You should eat something, Miss Matthews," he said softly, sliding the bowl through the feeding slot. "Keep up your strength." Sarah's voice was hoarse from crying, but her words carried steel. "How can they do this, Thomas? How can they condemn a child for existing?" Her son stirred in her arms, and she gentled her tone, humming softly until he settled. Hayes glanced over his shoulder before leaning closer to the bars. "There's more happening here than meets the eye, Miss Matthews. The mayor, he's been acting strange ever since the sheriff's death. Something about mining rights and property deeds. I've tried to piece it together, but—" He straightened abruptly, as footsteps echoed down the corridor. Burton's shadow preceded him into the jail. "Deputy, Hayes, you're relieved for the evening. I need a private word with our prisoner." His tone brooked no argument, and Hayes departed with a last worried glance at Sarah. "You could stop this," Sarah said quietly, as Burton approached her cell. "You know this isn't justice." The mayor's smile never reached his eyes. "Justice is what I say it is, my dear. This town exists because men like me understand that order must be maintained at any cost. Your execution will serve a greater purpose. It will remind everyone that actions have consequences." Sarah's grip tightened on her child. "And what about your actions, Mayor Burton? What about their consequences?" For a moment, something like fear flickered across Burton's face. Then his features hardened once more. "Enjoy your last night with your bastard, Miss Matthews. Tomorrow at noon, Black Rock will witness the price of defiance." As Burton's footsteps faded away, Sarah pressed her lips to her son's forehead. "Your father was a good man," she whispered, "and somehow, some way, the truth will come to light." In the gathering darkness outside, a lone rider approached Black Rock, his duster coated with trail dust, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. In his saddlebags, he carried truth and vengeance in equal measure, and his arrival would shake this frontier town to its very foundations. Sarah Matthews traced her fingers over the simple gold band hidden in the hem of her dress, remembering the day James had slipped it onto her finger. The jail cell's darkness couldn't dim the memory of that spring evening, just 6 months ago, when hope had seemed as boundless as the Montana sky. She'd first met Sheriff James Cooper shortly after arriving in Black Rock. Fresh from teaching college in Boston, she'd found herself enchanted by the frontier town's rugged beauty and its people's determination. The sheriff had been different from the other men, quieter, more thoughtful, with eyes that carried wisdom earned through years of maintaining peace in a lawless land. "We need education out here more than we need guns," he'd told her one evening, helping her carry books into the newly established schoolhouse. "Mayor Burton sees only gold in the ground, but the real wealth of Black Rock is in its children." His weathered hand had brushed hers as he passed her a volume of Shakespeare, and something electric had passed between them. Their courtship had been careful, subtle. James understood the precarious nature of her position as the town's only schoolteacher. "Burton's particular about appearances," he'd explained, "especially when it comes to women of learning. Says they upset the natural order." His mouth had twisted with distaste at the words. Been that way ever since his wife left him for a professor back east. They'd married in secret one evening, with only the circuit-riding preacher as witness. James had insisted on proper documentation, though they'd agreed to keep it private until the right moment. "There's something not right about Burton's mining contracts," James had confided. "Been investigating it for months. Once I have proof, we'll announce everything together." But then had come that terrible night, 3 months ago, the pounding. On her door, well past midnight, Deputy Hayes, his young face ashen, bearing news of an accident at the mine shaft. James had gone to investigate a report of claim jumping, they said. The support beams had given way. No body was ever recovered. Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob that threatened to wake her sleeping son. She remembered James's last words to her that morning. "Whatever happens, keep the ring safe. There's more to it than just our marriage." She hadn't understood then. Even now, the words felt heavy with unspoken meaning. The baby stirred, and Sarah lifted him to her shoulder, humming softly, "James Jr., though she dared not call him that aloud. Not yet. Her mind drifted to the days following James's death, when she'd first realized she was with child. She'd nearly fled then, but something had held her in Black Rock. Perhaps it was the thought of abandoning the children who'd come to depend on her, or maybe it was the nagging sense that James's death hadn't been the accident everyone claimed. Mayor Burton had been almost solicitous at first, offering condolences for the loss of our dear sheriff, while simultaneously pushing through appointments for a new one. But his demeanor had changed the moment her condition became apparent. The whispers had started, then the open accusations, finally the arrest. the mockery of a trial, and now the gallows. "Your father was building a case," she whispered to her. "Sleeping son. Something about the mining rights, about who really owns this land." Her fingers found the ring again, feeling the slight irregularity in its surface that she'd never had time to ask James about. If only he'd left some sign, some proof of what he'd discovered. A floorboard creaked in the corridor outside her. "Cell." Sarah tensed, expecting Burton's return, but instead a different figure emerged from the shadows. Deputy Hayes, his face tight with anxiety. "Miss Matthews," he whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "There's something you should know. A rider just came into town, says he knew the sheriff from back in the war. He's asking questions about the mine, about the claim registers." Hayes swallowed hard. "Burton's called in extra men. Whatever's coming, it's coming soon." Sarah's heart thundered in her chest. "This rider, did he give a name?" Hayes shook his head. "Goes by Ghost, is all anyone's saying. But he's carrying papers, Miss Matthews, and a letter with the sheriff's seal." For the first time since James's death, Sarah felt something dangerous kindle in her chest. Hope. She clutched her son closer, feeling the reassuring weight of the ring against her skin. James had always said that truth, like gold, had a way of surfacing eventually. Perhaps its time had finally come. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the sound of approaching hoofbeats. In her arms, James Jr. stirred and opened his eyes. Eyes that were the mirror image of his father's. Dawn was still hours away, but in Black Rock, the darkness before the light was about to reveal its secrets. Thomas Riley sat at the back corner of Black Rock's only saloon, his eyes taking in every detail while appearing to focus solely on his coffee. 20 years of cavalry reconnaissance during the war had taught him the value of patience and observation. The sheriff's badge in his pocket seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. The saloon's regular patrons cast furtive glances his way, their whispered conversations carrying fragments across the room. Riding James Cooper's old horse, papers from the territorial governor, asking about the mine records. Fear had a way of loosening tongues, and Thomas had spent the evening collecting those whispers like pieces of a puzzle. "More coffee, mister?" The barmaid's hand trembled slightly as she held the pot. Her eyes darted to the window, where the gallows stood stark against the starlit sky. "Thank you, ma'am." His voice was quiet, gentle, a stark contrast to his weathered appearance. "Tell me, how long have you known Sarah Matthews?" The woman's face softened at the name. 2 years now. Best teacher this town's ever had. What they're doing to her. She glanced around nervously before continuing in a whisper. "It ain't right. Sheriff Cooper, he was a good man. Never believed that accident story, not for a minute." Thomas nodded slowly, remembering the last letter he'd received from James 3 months ago. "Trouble brewing in Black Rock," his old cavalry companion had written. "Need your particular skills with documents and investigations. If anything happens, to me, look in the usual place." They developed that code during the war, the hollow heel of a cavalry boot, perfect for concealing vital intelligence. Now James was dead, his boots mysteriously missing from the effects returned to his office. But Thomas had found what he needed elsewhere, in a sealed envelope hidden behind a loose brick in the cemetery caretaker's cottage, where they'd once taken shelter during a thunderstorm while tracking deserters. The saloon's batwing doors creaked, admitting Burton's new sheriff, a hard-faced man named Kendrick. Thomas recognized the type, a gun for hire with a thin veneer of legality. The badge on his chest might be silver, but the man's loyalty was pure gold, bought and paid for. Kendrick swaggered to the bar, making a show of adjusting his gun belt. "Mayor wants to see you, stranger. Says it's about your interest in official business." His hand rested casually near his holster. Thomas took another slow sip of coffee. "Come to the mayor to take an interest. I'll be along directly." He placed a coin on the table with deliberate care. "Just finishing my coffee." The new sheriff's eyes narrowed at the subtle dismissal. "Don't take too long. Mayor Burton's not A patient man. He turned and left, boot heels striking the wooden floor with unnecessary force. Once Kendrick was gone, Thomas slipped a folded paper from his jacket and passed it to the barmaid. "See that Deputy Hayes gets this. Tell him it's about James Cooper's last report to the Territorial Marshal." She tucked the paper into her apron pocket without a word, understanding the weight of the moment. Thomas stood, adjusted his hat, and stepped out into the night. The gallows loomed before him, its rough-hewn timber a testament to hasty construction and hastier judgment. In his mind, he heard James's voice from their last conversation. "Something's wrong here, Ghost. Burton's got his fingers in every pie, but the mining deeds don't add up. Land grants overlapping, claims registered to dead men, surveys that don't match the territory records. I'm close to proving it." But he'd never finished that sentence. Thomas walked slowly toward the mayor's office, noting the armed men positioned in shadows along the street. Burton was preparing for trouble. Good. That meant the evidence James had discovered was significant enough to warrant such precautions. The door to Burton's office was open, lamplight spilling onto the boardwalk. Thomas paused at the threshold, taking in the scene. Burton stood behind his desk, attempting to project authority, but Thomas noted the slight tremor in his hands, the sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the cool night air. "Come in, Mr. Burton let the question hang. "Riley, Thomas Riley." He stepped inside, carefully positioning himself with his back to the wall, aware of the second man hidden behind the office door. "Though some folks from the war days call me Ghost." Burton's attempt at a welcoming smile failed to reach his eyes. "And what brings a man with such an interesting nickname to our quiet town?" Thomas met Burton's gaze steadily, unfinished. "Business with James Cooper. Seemed to think there were some irregularities in the mining records that needed attention from the Territorial Marshal's office." The mayor's face hardened. Sheriff Cooper's tragic accident was thoroughly investigated. As for the mining records, they're properly filed and completely in order. He gestured to a shelf of leather-bound ledgers. "Feel free to examine them yourself." "Think I will," Thomas replied mildly. "Right after tomorrow's hanging." "Interesting." Timing, by the way. Scheduling an execution the day before the territorial auditor's scheduled visit. Burton's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of genuine fear. Behind the door, the hidden man shifted position, floorboards creaking beneath his feet. "I'd reconsider any plans to interfere with legal proceedings," Burton warned. "BlackRock takes its moral standards seriously." Thomas turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. So did James Cooper. Funny thing about morals, they have a way of revealing themselves, especially when there's a noose involved. He stepped out into the night, counting the seconds until the hidden man emerged to follow him. 3, he wagered. Burton's hired. Guns were nothing if not predictable. As he walked away, Thomas patted the sheriff's badge in his pocket. By this time tomorrow, either justice would be served in BlackRock, or he'd be lying beside his old friend in an unmarked grave. Either way, the truth James Cooper died protecting would finally see the light of day. In the pre-dawn hours, Deputy Hayes crouched behind the cemetery caretaker's cottage, carefully unfolding the paper Thomas had passed to him. His hands shook. As he read James Cooper's final report to the Territorial Marshal, the dead sheriff's precise handwriting illuminated by a sliver of moonlight. "Land deed registration anomalies. BlackRock Township," the document began. "Investigation reveals systematic fraud dating back 7 years. Mayor Theodore Burton has been registering mining claims under the names of deceased settlers, manipulating property boundaries and falsifying survey records." The sound of approaching footsteps sent Hayes scrambling for cover. He tucked the damning document into his boot just as 2 of Burton's hired men passed by, their low voices carrying in the still night air. "Mayor wants the schoolteacher's cell watched close," one muttered. "Says this Riley character might try something before dawn." Hayes waited until they passed, before slipping away toward the church, where he'd arranged to meet Thomas. The old building's shadows welcomed him, and he found the cavalry veteran waiting in the bell tower, his eyes fixed on the jail across the street. James was right about everything, Hayes whispered, producing the report. Burton's been stealing land. For years. Look here. He pointed to a carefully drawn map in the margin. The richest mining veins run right through properties that supposedly belong to dead men. Thomas studied the document, his weathered face grave in the dim light. James discovered something else too, something that made Burton desperate enough to kill him. He reached into his coat and withdrew a leather folio. Found this in the Territorial Land Office archives. It's the original survey map from when BlackRock was founded. Hayes leaned closer, comparing the two documents. The boundaries are different. The whole town grid is shifted nearly a quarter-mile east of where Burton's records show it. And that shift just happens to put the major gold deposits under land that Burton claims to own. Thomas's voice was grim. But here's what James figured out. The shift also means that most of Burton's supposedly legal claims actually sit on Crow tribal land. One complaint to the federal authorities, and Burton loses everything, Hayes finished. No wonder he wanted James dead. He paused, a new thought striking him. But what's this got to do with Sarah Matthews and her child? Thomas's eyes narrowed. Think about it. What's the surest way to claim property in a frontier town? Understanding dawned on Hayes's face. Inheritance. If James and Sarah were married, then their child is heir to all of James's property, including any evidence he collected. Thomas stood, checking his pocket watch. Burton's not just trying to silence Sarah. He's trying to eliminate any legal claim that could challenge his ownership before the territorial auditor arrives. A bell tolled in the distance. 4 hours until dawn. In her cell, Sarah stirred at the sound, her son whimpering softly against her shoulder. She didn't know that at that very moment, allies were gathering evidence that would either save her life or seal her fate. Thomas moved to the bell tower window, his silhouette barely visible against the star-filled sky. James left one more piece of evidence, something he knew Burton would never think to look for. He withdrew a small key from his boot heel. The Territorial Bank in Helena holds a safety deposit box. Inside is every document James collected, along with sworn testimonies from settlers who were forced to sell their claims to Burton at fraction of their worth. Why didn't he bring charges? Hayes asked. He needed one final piece of proof, Burton's personal ledger, the one that shows where the money really came from and went. Thomas's voice hardened. The one he was looking for the night he died. Below. And then movement caught their attention. Burton's men were changing guard shifts at the jail. Among them was Sheriff Kendrick, his silver star glinting dully in the lamplight. Some of those men fought with us in the war, Thomas mused. Fought for justice and right against wrong. Now look at them, hired guns protecting a thief and murderer. Hayes straightened his spine. Tell me what you need me to do. Get word to Sarah. She needs to know about the safety deposit box and its contents. If anything happens to me. Thomas passed him a sealed envelope. This contains copies of James's findings and a letter to the territorial governor. Make sure it reaches Helena. The deputy tucked the envelope inside his shirt, and Burton's ledger, a ghost of a smile, crossed Thomas's face. Already found it, hidden in plain sight just like James suspected. He patted his saddlebag. Burton keeps his most damning secrets behind a false cover in the town registry. Took it while he was trying to intimidate me in his office. Hayes's eyes widened. Then we have everything we need to save Sarah. Not yet. Thomas's voice was cautious. Burton still has hired guns and the power of his office. He'll kill to keep his secrets, and he's got enough men to make it look legal. He checked his watch again. Get back to your post. When the time comes, make sure Sarah and the child are ready to move. As Hayes slipped away into the darkness, Thomas remained in the bell tower, watching the first hints of false dawn touch the eastern sky. In a few hours, Burton would make his move, expecting to silence the last threat to his empire of fraud and murder. But he didn't know what James Cooper had known, that sometimes justice wore a badge, and sometimes it came like a ghost in the night, quiet and unstoppable as the truth itself. Dawn broke over Black Rock with an angry red sky. Mayor Burton stood at his office window, watching townsfolk gather in small clusters along the main street. Their whispered conversations carried an edge of unease that set his teeth on edge. In his hands, he clutched James Cooper's personal journal, recovered from the false bottom of the late sheriff's desk, the one place he hadn't thought to look until now. "Damn you, James," he muttered, scanning the careful documentation of his crimes. Every shadow deal, every forged document, every threatened settler, all recorded in methodical detail. The only missing pieces were the final pages, torn out. Just before Cooper's death, a knock at the door interrupted his brooding. Sheriff Kendrick entered, his face tight with concern. "Got troubles brewing, Mayor. Reverend Walsh is calling for a town meeting. Says he's got questions about the hanging." Burton's fingers tightened on the journal. Questions? About the timing. About the rush to judgment that Riley Fellow's been talking to people, showing some kind of papers. Kendrick shifted uncomfortably. "Some folks are saying we should wait for the territorial marshal." "The marshal won't be here until it's too late," Burton snapped. He moved to his desk, pulling out a strongbox. "Double the men at the jail. Post lookouts at every corner, and get word to our friends at the mine. Tell them to be ready if things get complicated." As Kendrick hurried out, Burton opened the strongbox, removing stacks of carefully forged documents. Each one a testament to years of meticulous planning, now threatening to unravel because of a schoolteacher and a meddling ex-cavalryman. Across town, in the small church that had served Black Rock for 20 years, Reverend Walsh faced a growing crowd of concerned citizens. The morning light filtered through stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across worried faces. "We're not here to judge," the Reverend began, his voice carrying the weight of moral authority. "We're here to ensure justice is truly served." He held up a copy of the territorial statutes. "The law requires a proper trial, with evidence presented before a jury. What's happening to Sarah Matthews flies in the face of both legal and moral law." Thomas Riley stood at the back of the church, watching faces in the crowd. He recognized the signs, the shift in sentiment, the awakening of conscience. But he also saw Burton's informants slipping out one by one, no doubt rushing to report this gathering. Mrs. Anderson, the baker's wife, stood up. "Sarah taught my Tommy to read when everyone else said he was too slow. She stayed after school every day for months. Never asked for a penny." Her voice shook with emotion. "That's not the action of an immoral woman." "What about the child?" someone called out. "Born out of wedlock? Says who?" It was Dr. Morrison who interrupted, his aged face flushed with anger. "I delivered. That boy. Sarah Matthews wore a wedding ring that night, though she begged me to keep it secret. Said there were things I was better off not knowing," the crowd murmured. Thomas watched understanding dawn on face after face. The good people of Black Rock were finally seeing what James Cooper had discovered, that their town had been built on lies, and those lies were about to cost an innocent woman her life. Reverend Walsh raised his hands for silence. "I propose we march to the mayor's office as a community and demand." The church doors burst open. Sheriff Kendrick strode in, flanked by armed deputies. "This gathering is over. Mayor Burton has declared martial law due to threats against public order." "What threats?" Thomas stepped forward, his voice carrying easily through the sudden silence. "The only threat I see is to justice itself." He reached into his coat, producing James Cooper's badge. "I ride with the Territorial Marshal's office, investigating the death of one of our own. Anyone interfering with that investigation will answer to federal authority." Kendrick's hand moved to his gun, but he froze at the sight of several townsfolk doing the same. The lines were being drawn, and he suddenly wasn't sure which side held the advantage. "Clear this church," he ordered, but his voice lacked conviction. "Anyone found gathering will be arrested for conspiracy." "Conspiracy?" Dr. Morrison laughed bitterly. "The only conspiracy here is the one that killed James Cooper." "The one that's trying to kill his—" He caught himself, but the unfinished thought hung in the air. Thomas watched Kendrick's face, saw the moment doubt crept in. The hired gun was starting to realize he'd signed on for more than simple intimidation. As the church reluctantly emptied, Thomas caught Reverend Walsh's eye. A subtle nod passed between them. The Reverend would spread the word, gathering those willing to stand against Burton's tyranny. The morning wind carried the sound of hammering from the town square, final preparations for the gallows that would either see justice hung or set it free. Thomas touched the journal pages hidden in his coat, the final evidence James Cooper had died protecting. By noon, one way or another, the truth would stand in the light of day. In her cell, Sarah Matthews heard the church bell toll 6 times. 6 hours until her scheduled execution. 6 hours for justice to triumph or fail. She held her son closer, feeling the weight of James's ring against her heart, and prayed that the truth her husband died for would finally come to light. Old Joe Miller's photography studio had documented BlackRock's history for 15 years. Now, as he held up a faded photograph to the morning light, his hands trembled. The image showed a younger James Cooper standing proud beside Sarah Matthews, surrounded by the town council at last year's Founders' Day celebration. But it was the detail in the background that drew his eye. Mayor Burton's face, caught in an unguarded moment, staring at the couple with unmistakable malice. "Found what you were looking for?" Thomas Riley's quiet voice made the old photographer. "Jumper, Lord above, you do move like a ghost." Joe handed over the photograph. "James ordered extra copies of this one. Said someday it might matter who was watching whom." Thomas studied the image carefully. James knew Burton was suspicious. Kept his marriage to Sarah secret to buy time for his investigation. He tucked the photograph into his vest. "Thank you, Joe. This helps prove there's more to the story than Burton's claiming." Outside, BlackRock was choosing sides. Storekeepers who supported Sarah kept their shops open, defying Burton's martial law. Those allied with the mayor shuttered their windows, drawing curtains against the growing tension. Armed men, some Burton's hired guns, others local farmers and miners who remembered James Cooper's fairness, watched each other across the dusty street. Deputy Hayes hurried up to Thomas, his young face flushed with urgency. "Just overheard 2 of Burton's men. They're planning to move Sarah before noon, take her out of town before you can present your evidence." He's getting desperate. Thomas checked his pocket watch. 5 hours until the scheduled execution. "Alert Reverend Walsh. Tell him to gather our supporters near the jail, but peacefully. No guns, unless Burton's men draw first." As Hayes hurried off, Thomas caught movement in an upper window of the hotel. Samuel Whitaker, Burton's clerk, was making frantic gestures. Their eyes met, and the clerk held up a stack of papers before disappearing from view. "Another ally," Thomas murmured. Even Burton's closest associates were beginning to see the truth. In the jail, Sarah heard the growing commotion outside. Her son stirred restlessly, picking up on the tension. Through her window, she could see groups of townspeople gathering. Some with faces she recognized from school functions and church socials. They were taking a stand for her, risking Burton's wrath to see justice done. A shadow fell across her cell. Sheriff Kendrick stood there, his face troubled. "Things are coming apart out there," he said quietly. "Burton's talking about moving you. Says it's for your own safety." Sarah met his eyes steadily. "We both know that's a lie, Sheriff. Just like we both know James Cooper didn't die in any accident." Kendrick flinched. "I took this job thinking it was simple law work. Good pay, easy duties." He fingered his badge uncertainly. "Never signed on for murder. There's still time to choose the right side," Sarah said softly. "James always said a badge was only as honest as the heart behind it." The sheriff's response was cut short by the sound of running feet. Burton burst into the jail, his face flushed with rage. "Get her ready to move, now!" But Kendrick didn't move. Instead, he stepped between Burton and the cell, his hand resting on his gun. "No, sir, not without proper papers and a federal marshal present." The mayor's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You're forgetting who pays your salary, Sheriff. And you're forgetting what the badge stands for." Kendrick's voice was firm. This stops now, or I start asking hard questions about the night James Cooper died. Outside, the crowd grew larger. The sound of their voices carried through the window, neighbors and friends standing together against injustice. Burton glared at Kendrick, then at Sarah, before storming out. His authority was crumbling, and they all knew it. Sarah touched her hidden wedding ring, feeling strength flow through her. James had believed in justice enough to die for it. Now others were willing to stand for that same cause, turning the tide against Burton's years of corruption and fear. The telegram arrived at BlackRock's Western Union office just as the clock struck 8. The operator's hands shook as he decoded the message, his eyes widening at its contents. Territorial Marshal confirms Thomas Riley's authority. Full investigation ordered into James Cooper death. Cease all actions against Sarah Matthews pending. Review Governor's orders. Burton snatched the yellow paper from the operator's hands, his face darkening as he read. Outside his office, Thomas Riley stood on the boardwalk, waiting. He'd positioned himself deliberately, visible to the growing crowd, while keeping Burton's hired guns in his peripheral vision. "That telegram won't stop what's coming," Burton called out, crumpling the paper. "BlackRock handles its own justice." "Like, you handled James Cooper's justice?" Thomas's voice carried clearly in the morning air. Interesting how an experienced mine inspector could die in a shaft collapse, yet no body was ever recovered. The crowd stirred. Among them, Dr. Morrison spoke up. "Come to think of it, Mayor, you never did allow a proper search of that shaft." "It was unstable," Burton snapped. "Too dangerous." "Convenient," Thomas remarked. "Just like it's convenient that Sarah Matthews is scheduled to hang the day before the territorial auditor arrives to review mining claims." Burton's hand moved toward his gun, but he froze as several townspeople, including former soldiers who'd served with James, shifted their stance, ready for trouble. The mayor forced a harsh laugh instead. "You're playing a dangerous game, Riley, stirring up trouble with wild accusations. No game." Thomas reached into his coat, producing the territorial governor's badge alongside James Cooper's old star. "This is a formal investigation into corruption, land fraud and murder. Sheriff Cooper was building a case against you. His death wasn't an accident." A new figure pushed through the crowd, Samuel Whitaker, Burton's clerk, clutching a leather portfolio. "He's right, Mayor." Whitaker's voice quavered but held firm. "I've kept copies of everything. The forged deeds, the fake claims, the bribes paid to stay quiet about the sheriff's death." Burton's face went deadly pale. "You treacherous little—" "I was there that night," Whitaker continued, his words tumbling out. "Heard you tell those hired men to make sure the shaft collapsed while the sheriff was inspecting it. Heard you laugh about how convenient it was that his body would never be found." The crowd's murmur turned ugly. Burton backed toward his office door, but Thomas's quiet voice stopped him. "Those mine tunnels hide more than gold, don't they? They hide evidence. They hide bodies. They hide the truth about how you've run this town through fear and murder." "You can't prove any of this," Burton snarled, but his eyes darted between faces in the crowd, seeing former allies turning away, seeing justice closing in. "Sarah Matthews can," Thomas replied. "That's why she has to die, isn't it? Because she knows something James told her before you had him killed, something about those mines, about the real ownership of BlackRock's land." Burton's gun cleared its holster with surprising speed, but Thomas was faster. The mayor's weapon went spinning as a single shot rang out. Burton clutched his bleeding hand, staring in shock at the man who seemed to appear from nowhere, living up to his wartime nickname. "You're under arrest," Thomas said quietly, "for the murder of James Cooper, for conspiracy to commit murder against Sarah Matthews, and for land fraud against the territory of Montana." He turned to Kendrick. "Sheriff, I believe you have a jail cell available." As Burton was led away, cursing and struggling, Thomas caught sight of Sarah at her cell window. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her a slight nod. The first move had been made, but the game wasn't over. Burton still had men loyal to him, men who would try to silence the truth before it could fully come to light. The clock struck 9. 3 hours until noon, when either justice would prevail or more blood would stain Blackrock's streets. Thomas touched the badges he wore, one old, one new, both representing the law that Burton had corrupted for so long. The real fight was just beginning. In the jailhouse's back office, Thomas Riley examined the document that had just been delivered, a court order declaring Sarah Matthews unfit for child custody, signed by Judge Harrison in Helena 3 days. Prior, the paper was expertly forged, right down to the official territorial seal, but Thomas had spent too many years detecting Confederate counterfeits during the war to be fooled. "Burton's work?" Deputy Hayes asked, watching Thomas hold the document up to the light. "His insurance policy." Thomas traced the slight irregularities in the seal's impression. If the hanging failed, he'd use this to separate Sarah from her child. A mother declared unfit has no legal standing to inherit property. Outside the jail, the tension in Black Rock had shifted but not dissolved. Burton's remaining loyal men had gathered at the Golden Nugget Saloon, their numbers swelled by rough-looking newcomers filtering in from the mining camps. They were waiting for something, orders, opportunity, or both. Sarah's cell door opened and Dr. Morrison hurried in, his medical bag clutched tightly. "The child's fever's rising," he announced, loud enough for Burton to hear from his cell. Across the corridor, "Need to get him to my surgery right away," but as the doctor bent over the infant, he whispered to Sarah, "Just a ruse. Burton's men are planning something. Thomas needs you and the boy ready to move at a moment's notice." Sarah clutched her son closer, feeling his perfectly normal temperature against her chest. Through her window, she could see armed townspeople positioning themselves around the jail, led by Reverend Walsh. They were preparing for trouble. In his cell, Burton paced like a caged wolf, his bandaged hand pressed against his chest. "That child needs proper care," he called out, his voice dripping false concern. "I have a court order." "A forged court order," Thomas interrupted, approaching Burton's cell. "Just like the forged mining deeds. Just like the forged death. Certificates you used to steal land from widows and orphans." Burton's smile was razor-sharp. "Prove it. Prove any of it before noon." "That's all the time you have left, Ghost. My men won't stay quiet much longer, knowing their wages depend on keeping certain secrets buried." "Like James Cooper is buried?" Thomas's quiet words hit like bullets. "The shaft where you killed him. It connects to other tunnels, doesn't it? Tunnels that lead outside town, convenient for moving men and materials without being seen." Burton's face tightened, and Thomas knew he'd struck truth. The mayor had an escape plan, and his men were positioning themselves to execute it. A commotion erupted outside. 2 miners burst into the jail, supporting a third who was bleeding heavily from a head wound. "Cave in at the north shaft," one shouted. "Men trapped." Thomas saw the gleam in Burton's eyes and knew it was a diversion. Even as Deputy Hayes rushed to help the injured man, shots rang out from the direction of the Golden Nugget. The siege of Black Rock had begun. "Get Sarah and the child to the church," Thomas ordered Morrison, drawing his gun. "Hayes, get Burton secured. He's not leaving that cell." But Burton was laughing now, a sound empty of everything except triumph. "Too late, Ghost. The truth dies at noon, one way or another. And this time, there won't be any bodies left to find." More shots echoed through the street. Through the window, Thomas saw Burton's men emerging from multiple locations, armed and moving with military precision. This wasn't just a jailbreak attempt. It was a coordinated assault to seize control of the town. "They're trying to reach the mine entrances," Hayes called out, recognizing the pattern. "If they get control of the tunnels, they'll have access to every building in town from below," Thomas finished. He'd seen the survey maps, understood now why Burton had worked so hard to keep them secret. Black Rock wasn't just built near the mines, it was built over them. The entire town was sitting atop a network of tunnels that Burton knew better than anyone. The clock struck 10. its chimes nearly lost in the growing gunfire. 2 hours until noon, and Black Rock had become a battlefield. Burton's desperate gambit was putting every life in town at risk, but Thomas finally understood why. It wasn't just about Sarah or her child anymore. The truth buried in those minds could destroy not just Burton, but every corrupt official and business owner who'd profited from his schemes. The war for Black Rock's soul had begun, and its battleground lay in the darkness beneath their feet. Sarah Matthews stood in the church sanctuary, holding her son close as Reverend Walsh pulled back the heavy carpet beneath the altar, revealing a trap door and what appeared to be a marriage certificate sealed in an oilskin packet. "James left this here the night before he died," the Reverend explained, his hands trembling as he broke the seal. "Made me swear to protect it, and you, if anything happened to him." The document's official territorial seal gleamed in the colored light from the stained glass windows. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she read the date, 6 months ago, and the signatures of James Cooper and herself, with the Reverend listed as witness. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew what Burton might do, so he made sure there was proof." She touched the dried ink of James's signature, remembering his words that day. "This makes it official in the eyes of God and the law." Gunfire echoed outside, closer now. Through the windows, they could see Burton's men advancing through the streets, engaged in a running battle with townspeople who'd taken up arms to defend their homes. "The marriage certificate is only part of it," Thomas said, studying the document. "Look at the witness signatures, not just Reverend Walsh, but Judge Edwards from the territorial court. James made sure this would stand up to any legal challenge." Bullets shattered one of the stained glass windows, sending colored shards raining down on the altar. Thomas moved quickly, helping Sarah and the child toward the trapdoor. "The tunnel leads to the old mission outside town," Reverend Walsh explained. "James used it during the war to help runaway slaves. Now it'll help save his wife and son." But before they could open the trapdoor, the church doors burst open. Sheriff Kendrick stumbled in, bleeding from a shoulder wound. "Burton's escaped," he gasped. "His men blasted through the jail wall from the mine tunnels. He's headed for the registry office, says he's going to destroy every record in town." "Before the territorial marshal arrives," Thomas's face hardened. "The registry office connects to the main mine shaft, doesn't it?" "The one where James died?" Kendrick nodded. "Burton knows those tunnels better than anyone. He's been using them for years to move gold out of town without paying territorial taxes." "That's why James was really down there that night," Sarah realized, her voice tight with anger. "He wasn't investigating claim jumping. He was following Burton's secret gold shipments." Another explosion rocked the street outside. Thomas checked his ammunition, then turned to Reverend Walsh. "Get them to safety through the tunnel. Kendrick and I will head for the registry office. Burton's not destroying any more evidence." Sarah caught his arm. "Wait!" She shifted her son to one arm and pulled the gold wedding ring from her finger. "James said there was more to this ring than our marriage. Said if anything happened to him, I should look inside it." Thomas examined the ring carefully, then twisted the band in a specific way. The gold circle split, revealing a tiny key hidden in the band's thickness. His eyes widened in recognition. A safety deposit box key. This matches the number in James's last report, the box in Helena, where he stored copies of everything he'd discovered. Which means Burton's plan fails even if he destroys the local records, Kendrick said. There's still proof of his crimes. More gunfire erupted outside, and smoke began to drift through the broken windows. "Burton's men are setting fires," Reverend Walsh warned. "They're trying to force everyone out into the open." Thomas pocketed the key and helped Sarah toward the trapdoor. "Get to the mission. When the territorial marshal arrives, show him the marriage certificate and tell him where to find the safety deposit box." He managed a grim smile. James Cooper left a trail of truth that not even Burton can erase. As Sarah descended into the tunnel with her son, she looked back one last time. James believed in justice enough to die for it. Don't let his sacrifice be in vain. Thomas nodded, then turned to Kendrick. "Ready to earn that badge for real, Sheriff?" Kendrick checked his gun, his face set with determination. Time to finish what James Cooper started. The clock struck 11 as they slipped out of the church. 1 hour until noon, and somewhere in the burning streets or the dark tunnels below, Burton was making his final desperate bid to bury the truth. But he didn't know what Thomas had just realized. The truth, like gold, had already been safely stored beyond his reach. Smoke drifted through Blackrock's streets as Thomas and Kendrick made their way toward the registry office. Through the haze, they could see Burton's will lying open on his desk, visible through the window, a final mockery of legal proceedings. The document, freshly drafted, named Burton as the sole heir to all unclaimed properties in Black Rock, including the contested mining rights. "His backup plan," Thomas muttered, studying the document's elaborate legal language. "If he can't destroy the evidence, he'll try to tie everything up in territorial court until the witnesses are gone or bought off." Kendrick pressed a hand against his wounded shoulder. "He's got men positioned on every corner. Getting to that office won't be easy." A bullet splintered the wood beside them, sending them diving for cover behind a water trough. Burton's voice carried from somewhere ahead. "Give it up, Ghost! You're fighting for a dead man's lies!" "And the only lies here are yours, Burton," Thomas called back. "We found James's marriage certificate. Sarah's child is his legal heir, and heir to everything Cooper owned, including those mining rights you killed him over." The silence that followed was deafening. Then Burton laughed, a sound edged with desperation. "You think that changes anything? By sunset, there won't be a single document left in Black Rock to prove who owns what. It'll be my word against a dead man's wife. And who? Do you think the territorial court will believe?" More shots rang out, keeping Thomas and Kendrick pinned down. Through gaps in the smoke, they could see Burton's men converging on the registry office. They were gathering documents, preparing to destroy decades of legal records. James knew this. "Might happen," Kendrick said suddenly. "That's why he made copies of everything. That safety deposit box in Helena. It's not just evidence of Burton's crimes. It's a complete backup of the town's real property records." Thomas nodded grimly. "Which means we don't need to stop them from burning the registry. We just need to keep Burton from escaping until the marshal arrives." He checked his pocket watch. 40 minutes until noon. A new sound cut through the gunfire. Pickaxes striking stone. Burton's miners were breaking through somewhere below the street. The tunnel network, Kendrick realized. They're not trying to destroy the records. They're creating a distraction while Burton escapes through the mines. Thomas pulled James's badge from his pocket, studying it in the smoky light. Something about its weight had always felt odd. Acting on instinct, he pressed the star's points in sequence. The badge's face popped open, revealing a carefully folded paper. A map, he breathed, unfolding it. James mapped the entire tunnel network, including Burton's secret passages. "Look, they all connect to an abandoned shaft north of town. That's his escape route." Kendrick studied the map. "We can cut him off, but we'll need help. Most of his men are up here, causing chaos." While Burton slips away below, Thomas finished. "Not this time." He turned to see Dr. Morrison hurrying toward them, crouched low to avoid bullets. "Sarah and the child are safe at the mission," the doctor reported. "Reverend Walsh is with them. But there's more. Burton's men are pulling back from the south side of town. They're concentrating around the registry office." Thomas showed him the map. "Because the real action is underground. Get word to our people. Let Burton's men have the registry office. The real fight will be at that northern shaft." Morrison nodded, understanding. "I'll spread the word, but Thomas, Sarah said something you should know. That night before James died, he told her he'd found something in the mines, something that proved Burton never had legal right to any of it. The original land grant," Kendrick said suddenly. "The one that shows this whole area was deeded to the Crow Nation. Burton's been claiming land he never had right to." Another explosion rocked the street. Through the registry office window, they could see flames beginning to catch hold. Burton was covering his tracks, But he didn't know his biggest secret was already exposed. Thomas checked his ammunition one last time. "Kendrick, gather every man we can trust. Doctor, get word to the mission. Tell them to hold that marriage certificate safe. It's time to end this where it began." In the darkness where Burton thought he could bury the truth, the clock tower chimed the quarter hour. Smoke rose over Black Rock, and beneath its streets, justice was about to meet corruption in one final desperate confrontation. In the gathering smoke, Thomas spread James Cooper's detailed map of Black Rock across a barrel top, its carefully drawn lines showing every mine tunnel and secret passage beneath the town. Former soldiers who'd served with James gathered around, their faces grim as they recognized the tactical genius of their fallen friend. Cooper wasn't just mapping escape routes, Sergeant Mike Hawkins, now the town's blacksmith, observed. He was mapping Burton's whole operation. "Look here." His finger traced a series of marked storage chambers. "These aren't natural formations. They're strong rooms, probably full of stolen gold and forged documents. And here's where it all leads." Thomas indicated the northern shaft, one main tunnel running straight to Burton's private rail spur. He's been moving gold out of Black Rock for years, right under everyone's noses. The map showed more than just tunnels. It revealed James Cooper's meticulous documentation of Burton's entire criminal empire. Each chamber was numbered, with a corresponding key noting its contents: territorial tax records, falsified, land grant documents, original and forged versions, mining claim registers, altered. Kendrick, his wounded shoulder now properly bandaged, studied the notations. James wasn't just building a case. He was creating a complete record of every crime Burton ever committed in Black Rock, which is why Burton had to kill him, Thomas said quietly, and why he's so desperate to escape now. This isn't just about one corrupt mayor anymore. These records could bring down half the territorial government. The sound of gunfire grew closer. Through the smoke, they could see Burton's men setting more fires, herding townspeople away. From certain areas that all corresponded to tunnel access points on James's map. "They're securing their escape routes," Hawkins noted. "Military precision. Burton's got experienced men down there." "So do we," Thomas responded, looking at the veterans gathered around him. "And we've got something they don't. We know exactly where they're going." He began assigning positions, using James's map to coordinate their response. Each man had served with James, knew his methods, understood the significance of his final mission. Now they would complete what their fallen friend had started. "Hawkins, take your group to the livery stable. There's a tunnel access behind the horse stalls." Thomas pointed to the map's markings. "Anderson, your team covers the old well near the church. Burton's men will try to use these routes when we push them back." "What about the main shaft?" Kendrick asked. "That's where Burton will head, his private exit strategy." Thomas nodded. "That's where we'll be, but first," he turned to Deputy Hayes, "get this map to Sarah at the mission. If anything happens to us, make sure the Territorial Marshal gets it. James died protecting this information. We need to make sure it survives." As Hayes hurried off with the precious document, Thomas could hear Burton's men moving into position. The corrupt mayor's voice carried through the smoke. "Last chance, Ghost. Walk away now, and maybe some of these good people don't have to die today." "It's over, Burton," Thomas called back. "We know about the tunnels, the strong rooms, the stolen gold. James Cooper mapped it all before you killed him." The silence that followed told Thomas his words had hit home. Then Burton's laugh, higher and more desperate than before. "You think I care about a few maps? By the time anyone could verify them, I'll be halfway to Mexico with enough gold to buy a new identity." "And what about James Cooper's murder?" Thomas pressed. "What about his wife and child?" "Dead men tell no tales," Burton shouted back. "And by sunset there won't be anyone left alive who knows the truth." Thomas met Kendrick's eyes. The sheriff nodded grimly. They'd gotten what they needed. Burton's public confession, heard by dozens of witnesses. Now they just had to stop him from escaping to make it count. The clock struck 11:30 as Thomas led his men toward the mine entrance. Through the smoke, they could see other groups moving into position, following James Cooper's final battle plan. Above ground, Black Rock burned. Below, in the darkness of the tunnels, justice was preparing to meet corruption in a reckoning long overdue. James died protecting the truth, Thomas told his men as they prepared to descend. Let's make sure he didn't die in vain. In the dim lantern light of the mine tunnel, Dr. Morrison clutched a worn leather medical bag, its contents rattling softly as he moved. But this was no ordinary doctor's kit. Inside lay James Cooper's final letter, written the night before his death, detailing Burton's crimes and the location of crucial evidence. The doctor had kept it hidden, waiting for the right moment, the right ally. Found it behind a loose brick in my surgery, Morrison whispered to Thomas as they crouched in the darkness. James knew Burton's men would search his office and home, but they'd never suspect the town doctor of harboring evidence. Thomas unfolded the letter carefully, its pages stiff with age and dampness. James's steady hand had documented everything, dates, amounts, names of corrupted officials. But it was the last paragraph that caught his eye. If you're reading this, I'm likely dead. Burton discovered I'd found proof of his original crime, the falsified land grant that let him steal this entire valley from its rightful owners. The evidence is hidden where he'd never think to look, inside his own pride and joy. A distant explosion echoed through the tunnels, followed by the sound of falling rock. Burton's men were collapsing passages behind them, cutting off escape routes. They're driving us toward the main shaft, Kendrick observed, his voice tight with pain from his wound. No, Thomas corrected, studying James's letter. They're driving us away from something. Look. He pointed to a hastily sketched map in the letter's margin. Burton's office safe isn't in his office at all. It's down here, built into the original mine shaft, the one place he thought no one would ever think to look. More explosions rocked the tunnel network. Through the maze of passages, they could hear Burton's men moving, their lanterns casting shifting shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Split up, Thomas ordered the group of veterans. Hawkins, take your men east. Make noise. Draw their attention. Anderson West Tunnel, same thing. Make Burton think we're scattered, searching blindly. As the men moved out, Thomas turned to Morrison. That passage there, it leads up to your surgery? At the doctor's nod, he continued. Get back up there. If this goes wrong, someone needs to survive who knows the truth. Morrison gripped Thomas's arm. James Cooper was my friend for 20 years. I watched Sarah birth his son. I won't let his killer escape justice. He pressed the letter into Thomas's hands. Just make sure this reaches the territorial marshal, Kendrick. Checked his ammunition as Morrison disappeared into the darkness. Burton's got at least 10 men down here. We've got 6, counting us. 7, came a quiet voice, and Deputy Hayes stepped from a side tunnel. Sarah's safe at the mission with Reverend Walsh. I came back to help end this. A bullet sparked off the rock near Thomas's head, and they dove for cover. Burton's voice echoed through the tunnels. I found Cooper nosing around here that night. Should have known he'd leave a trail for his war buddy to follow. That night you murdered him, Thomas called back, trying to pinpoint the voice's location. Or the night you found out he'd discovered your land grant fraud. Burton's laugh bounced off the stone walls. You still don't understand. This whole town exists because I made it exist. I built Black Rock from nothing. You stole it. Thomas moved carefully forward, signaling Hayes and Kendrick to flank around. Stole it from the Crow. Stole it from... Honest settlers killed anyone who discovered the truth. More gunfire erupted, closer now. Through the crossing tunnels, Thomas caught glimpses of movement, Burton's men falling back toward the main shaft. But something wasn't right about their pattern. They're not protecting an escape route, he realized suddenly. They're protecting that safe. Everything Burton's built is based on those original forged documents. Without them, he can't prove any claim to the land. And with them, Kendrick added, we can prove every crime he's committed. The clock above ground struck 12:15. Its muffled toll reaching even into the depths, 15 minutes until noon, when Sarah Matthews was scheduled to hang. But down in the darkness beneath Black Rock, the real judgment was about to be delivered. Thomas touched James Cooper's badge, still pinned to his vest. "Burton thought he could bury the truth down here in the dark," he said quietly. "Time to bring it into the light." In the flickering lantern light, Thomas's fingers traced the edge of James Cooper's pocket watch, found half buried in the mineshaft's dirt. Its gold case was dented, the crystal cracked, but the secret compartment in its back remained sealed, just as James had left it the night he died. Inside lay the final piece of evidence, a signed confession from Burton's original accomplice. "In the land grant fraud, written 15 years ago. He dropped it here," Burton's voice echoed from the darkness, "right before the support beams mysteriously gave way. Thought I didn't know about Cooper's little hiding spots in his fancy timepieces." Thomas kept the watch in his hand, using Burton's voice to track his movement. "But you never found the confession inside, did you? Never knew he'd already documented everything." A bullet sparked off the rock wall. Closer now. Burton's laugh held an edge of hysteria. "Doesn't matter, none of it matters. You think the territorial government will prosecute me? Half the officials in Helena are on my payroll." Through the crossing tunnels, Thomas could see Kendrick and Hayes moving into position. Above, the sound of gunfire had diminished. Burton's surface forces were being pushed back by the townspeople. Down here, in the darkness where it had all begun, the final confrontation was building. "Your men are deserting up there," Thomas called out. "They can sense which way the wind's blowing. Surrender now, Burton. Let the law handle this." "The law?" Burton's voice dripped contempt. "I am the law in Black Rock. Everything this town is I created. Every ounce of gold, every claim, every building. It's all mine." "It was never yours," Thomas replied calmly. "The land grant proves it. This valley belonged to the Crow Nation. You forged documents, murdered innocent people, built your empire on lies." A shadow moved in the tunnel ahead, one of Burton's remaining guards trying to slip away. Hayes emerged from a side passage, disarming the man quietly. The odds were shifting. "You want to know what really happened that night?" Burton's voice was closer, almost conversational. "Cooper came down here, self-righteous as always, waving proof he'd found. Said he was going to expose everything, return the land to its rightful owners. Couldn't let that happen. This town needs a strong hand, not some bleeding-heart sheriff's principles." Thomas edged forward, seeing Burton's lantern glow around a corner. "So you murdered him, collapsed the tunnel, thought you'd buried the truth forever." "Should have worked," Burton snarled. "But he'd already married that schoolteacher, hadn't he? Left her carrying his brat, a legitimate heir to challenge my claims." The confession rang through the tunnels. Thomas smiled grimly. "You hear that, boys? Mayor Burton just admitted to murder. Won't matter soon." Burton's voice held triumph. "This whole shaft is rigged with enough dynamite to bury everything, including you, and every scrap of evidence." But Thomas had been counting Burton's shots. "Your gun's empty, Burton, and your men up top have surrendered. It's over." He stepped around the corner, finding Burton standing before an iron safe built into the rock wall. The mayor held a match near a fuse that disappeared into the darkness. "Stay back!" Burton's hand trembled. "One move and I bring this whole mine down, like you did on James Cooper." Thomas kept his voice steady. "Only this time there are witnesses. Your confession echoed through every tunnel. My men are already heading up to testify." Burton's eyes darted wildly between Thomas and the fuse. "You don't understand. The territorial governor himself signed off on my original claims. If this evidence comes to light, the entire government will be implicated." "Good." Thomas took another step forward. "Time the whole territory saw the truth." Burton struck the match. But before he could touch it to the fuse, a shot rang out. The match flew from his fingers as he clutched his hand. The same one Thomas had wounded earlier. Sheriff Kendrick stepped from a side tunnel, his gun still smoking. "That's for James Cooper," he said quietly. As Thomas moved to secure Burton, the mayor sagged against the safe, his facade of power finally crumbling. "You can't break up everything I've built," he whispered. "This town needs me." "No," Thomas replied, opening the safe with the combination found in James's letter. "It needs the truth, and thanks to James Cooper's sacrifice, it's finally going." To get it, inside the safe lay the proof of every crime, every murder, every act of corruption that had built Burton's empire. And as Thomas gathered the evidence, the clock above ground struck noon, not for an execution, but for justice long delayed. The territorial judge's order arrived by special courier as the sun began to set over Black Rock. Its official seal caught the fading light as Thomas read it aloud to the assembled townspeople in front of the courthouse. Burton, now in chains, stood flanked by Kendrick and Hayes as the full weight of justice descended. "By order of the Territorial Court of Montana," Thomas read, his voice carrying across the crowd, "all property claims and business interests of Theodore Burton are hereby frozen pending full investigation. Furthermore, based on evidence of fraud and murder, Burton is to be held without bail and transported to Helena for trial." The document represented more than just Burton's arrest. It was the first step in restoring legitimate ownership to Black Rock's lands and mines. The judge's clear script detailed the initial findings. Evidence of systematic fraud, multiple murders, and corruption reaching into the highest levels of territorial government. The court recognizes the legal marriage of James Cooper and Sarah. "Matthews," Thomas continued, watching Sarah's eyes fill with tears of vindication, "their son is confirmed as Cooper's legitimate heir, with all rights and property duly transferred to his mother's guardianship until he comes of age." Burton's face twisted with rage. "You're destroying everything I built. This town would be nothing without me." "This town," Reverend Walsh stepped forward, "was built by the sweat and blood of honest people, people like James Cooper who died protecting the truth." He turned to the crowd. "The real Black Rock wasn't built on Burton's gold. It was built on community, on justice, on doing what's right." The judge's order went on to outline the immediate changes. An interim town council would be formed, mining claims would be reviewed and properly registered, and most importantly, negotiations would begin with the Crow Nation regarding their original land rights. "It's all here in black and white," Thomas said, holding up the document. "Every crime, every theft, every act of corruption. James Cooper died, making sure this truth couldn't stay buried." Sarah stepped forward, her son in her arms. The setting sun caught the gold of her wedding ring, no longer a secret, but a symbol of love and justice prevailing. "James believed in the law," she said quietly, "believed in it enough to die protecting it. Now that same law has finally served the truth." Burton lunged forward suddenly, his chains rattling. "The truth, you want the truth. Everything I did to build something great. Without me, Black Rock would still be an empty valley." "Without you," Thomas countered, "James Cooper would be alive. Honest settlers would own their land. The Crow people would have their rightful territory." He turned to Kendrick. "Get him out of here. The territorial marshal's waiting to escort him to Helena." As Burton was led away, his former empire crumbling around him, Dr. Morrison approached Thomas with a thoughtful expression. "You know, this reminds me of something James used to say. He told me once that justice is like mining for gold. Sometimes you have to dig deep and work through a lot of darkness before you find it." Thomas watched as the townspeople began to disperse, neighbors talking quietly about the future, about rebuilding on a foundation of truth rather than lies. The fires Burton's men had set were being extinguished, and through the settling smoke he could see the first stars appearing over the mountains. "Sarah," he called softly. When she turned, he held out James's pocket watch. "This belongs to your son now. His father left a legacy more valuable than gold. He left the truth that saved this town." Sarah took the watch, its dented case reflecting the last rays of sunlight. "What happens now?" she asked, looking at the gathered townspeople who had stood with her, fought for her, believed in her. "Now," Thomas smiled, "Black Rock gets a fresh start. The judge's order authorizes you to help form the new town council. James always said education was the real future of this place. Looks like you'll get to prove him right. The courthouse bell tolled, marking the end of one era and the beginning of another. Burton's corruption had been built in darkness, but James Cooper's sacrifice had brought everything into the light. As Thomas watched the townspeople heading home in the gathering dusk, he touched the territorial marshal's badge he wore alongside. James's star. Sometimes, he reflected, justice needed more than just the law. It needed good people willing to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. James Cooper had understood that. Now, thanks to him, Black Rock would have a chance to become the kind of town he had died believing it could be. The new town charter lay open on the council chamber table, its fresh ink reflecting the morning light. Sarah Matthews Cooper sat at the head of the table, reading aloud the document that would reshape Black Rock's future. Around her, the newly elected town council, a mix of merchants, miners, and longtime residents, listened intently. Article 1, she read, her clear voice carrying the weight of change, establishes that all mining claims and property deeds within Black Rock Township shall be subject to review by an independent commission, with priority given to original settlers and their documented heirs. Thomas stood by the window, watching the town come to life in the crisp autumn morning. The scars of Burton's final stand were already fading, burned buildings being repaired, streets cleared of debris, and most importantly, honest people reclaiming what was rightfully theirs. Article 2, Sarah continued, creates the position of town historian, charged with maintaining accurate records and ensuring transparency in all official proceedings. She smiled at Dr. Morrison, who had agreed to take on this vital role. No more secrets buried in tunnel safes or hidden ledgers. The charter represented more than just new laws. It was a covenant between the people of Black Rock and their own better natures. Each article had been carefully crafted to prevent another Burton from rising to power, while ensuring the town could grow and prosper honestly. The section on education is particularly important, Reverend Walsh noted, pointing to Article 5. Establishing a proper school board, funding for a new schoolhouse, and provisions for all children to attend, regardless of their parents' circumstances. Sarah touched the locket at her neck, a gift from James that now held a miniature portrait of their son. James always said education was the key to preventing corruption. When people understand their rights and responsibilities, they're harder to deceive. Thomas moved from the window to study the charter's final pages. The Crow Nation's representatives have approved the boundary agreements. At Sarah's nod, he smiled. James would be proud. Legitimate treaties, fair compensation, and protected access to sacred sites. It's more than just making amends, Samuel Whitaker added. The former clerk had found his courage in the final confrontation and now served as the council's secretary. It's about building real partnerships for the future. Sheriff Kendrick, his arm still in a sling but healing well, gestured to the mining provisions. With proper oversight and fair profit sharing, these mines can support everyone, not just line one man's pockets. The charter's final article established an annual day of remembrance for James Cooper and others who had died seeking justice in Black Rock. But it was more than a memorial. It was a reminder that the price of freedom was eternal vigilance. Outside, the sound of hammering echoed through the streets as workers repaired the damage from Burton's last desperate stand. The gallows had been dismantled, its wood repurposed to help build the new schoolhouse, a fitting transformation that James would have appreciated. There's one more thing, Thomas said quietly, producing a letter from his coat. The territorial. Governor wants me to stay on as marshal for this district. Says Black Rock could serve as a model for other mining towns dealing with corruption. Sarah smiled warmly. You've helped give us a fresh start, Thomas. We'd be honored to have you continue as part of our community. The council members nodded. In agreement. They had all seen how Thomas's quiet strength and unwavering integrity had helped guide them through their darkest hours. Besides, Dr. Morrison added with a twinkle in his eye, someone needs to keep an eye on all these reformed criminals. He gestured to the former Burton loyalists who had chosen to make amends and remain in town. Thomas considered the offer, looking around the room at these people who had fought alongside him for justice. In their faces, he saw what James Cooper had seen, the potential for something greater than gold or power. "I'll stay," he said simply. "Black Rock deserves a chance to become what James believed it could be." Sarah signed the charter with a steady hand, her signature marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. As morning sun filled the council chamber, the new town charter seemed to glow with possibility, a testament to the triumph of truth over corruption, of community over greed. The bell in the newly repaired church tower rang out clear and strong, calling the people of Black Rock to witness the signing of their new beginning. The sound carried across the valley, echoing off the mountains that had seen so much darkness and were now, at last, witnessing the dawn of justice. The memorial plaque gleamed in the autumn sunlight, its freshly engraved bronze catching the morning rays. Mounted on the new courthouse wall, it told a story not just of corruption defeated, but of justice restored. In memory of Sheriff James Cooper, who gave his life, defending truth and justice, and all those who stood against tyranny, that Black Rock might know freedom. September 1874. Sarah stood before the memorial, her young son cradled in one arm, while her free hand traced the letters of her husband's name. Around her, the town had gathered for the dedication ceremony, not just the council members and business people, but miners, ranchers, and representatives from the Crow Nation. Thomas stepped forward, James's old badge pinned beside his marshal's star. "A good man once told me that justice isn't just about punishing the guilty, it's about restoring what was taken." He gestured to the newly established territorial court office next door. Thanks to James Cooper's sacrifice, Black Rock isn't just rebuilding, it's becoming a symbol of what's possible when people stand together for what's right. The evidence James had gathered, hidden in his pocket watch and safety deposit box, had led to more than just Burton's conviction. The territorial governor had resigned in disgrace. Corrupt officials were being rooted out across Montana, and stolen lands were being returned to their rightful owners. Sarah stepped forward, her voice clear in the morning air. James believed in the law, but he believed in people more. He saw what this town could be, not a place built on greed and fear, but on education, honest work, and respect for all who call this valley home. The new schoolhouse stood as testament to that vision, its doors open to all children regardless of background. Inside, Sarah's classroom displayed a framed copy of the original land grant, teaching future generations about the importance of truth and justice. Dr. Morrison, serving now as both physician and town historian, gestured to the growing crowd. "Look around you. Every face here has a story about James Cooper, how he helped a widow keep her claim, how he made sure miners' children could read, how he listened to the Crow elders and documented their rightful claims." Sheriff Kendrick, his arm now fully healed, nodded toward the mines visible in the distance. The Territorial Commission's new oversight rules are being called the Cooper Regulations. Other mining towns are adopting them too. His influence keeps spreading. The memorial plaque caught the light again as clouds parted overhead. Below James's dedication, smaller letters listed the names of others who had fought for justice, including those who had stood with Thomas. During the final confrontation in the mines, Samuel Whitaker, who had risked everything to expose Burton's crimes, stepped forward with a leather-bound volume. "The town records have all been verified and properly registered now. Every deed, every claim, every marriage and birth, all documented honestly." He smiled at Sarah. "Including yours, Mrs. Cooper." The gathered crowd nodded in approval. They had all seen how Burton's web of lies had nearly destroyed their community. Now, transparency and truth were their foundation stones. Reverend Walsh raised his hands for the dedication prayer, but paused. As riders appeared on the road from Helena, Thomas recognized the territorial marshal's deputies carrying news they had all been waiting for. "The verdict is in," the lead rider announced. "Theodore Burton, guilty on all counts. He'll spend the rest of his life in territorial prison." He produced an official document, and the governor has signed the final restoration orders. All stolen properties have been legally returned to their rightful owners. A cheer went up from the crowd, but Sarah remained quiet, her eyes on the memorial plaque. Justice had been served, but the price had been high. Yet, as she looked at her son, at the town being reborn around her, she knew James would have considered it worth the cost. Thomas touched the twin badges on his chest, one representing the law's authority, the other representing the man who had died defending it. "James Cooper's legacy isn't just in bronze and stone," he said softly. "It's in every honest deed recorded, every child educated, every wrong made right." The morning sun climbed higher, casting the shadow of the memorial plaque across the courthouse steps. In its shade, the people of Black Rock stood united, miners and merchants, settlers and native people, all part of the community James Cooper had died protecting. His sacrifice had planted seeds of justice that would continue growing long after this day of remembrance. 1 year later, Sarah Cooper opened the family Bible, its pages now containing far more than just scripture. Between its leather covers lay the complete true history of Black Rock. Marriage certificates, birth records, mining deeds, and personal letters that told the story of justice restored. Her fingers traced the careful inscription on the frontispiece. "To my wife Sarah and our son, may this record stand as testament to the truth that set our town free. With eternal love, James." She had found the Bible in James's office after the confrontation, prepared in advance, as if he had known what was coming. Through the schoolhouse window, she could see Thomas Riley teaching a group of children about the law, his marshal's badge catching the summer sun. He had kept his promise to stay, helping Black Rock become a model of frontier justice for the entire territory. "And who can tell me," she heard him ask, "why we keep such careful records of our deeds and claims?" A small hand shot up. "Her sons. Because the truth protects everyone, sir. That's what my father believed." Sarah smiled, adding another entry to the Bible's pages. 1 year since justice prevailed. Black Rock prospers under honest leadership. The Cooper mining regulations have been adopted across 3 territories. James would be proud of what his sacrifice achieved. The town had flourished beyond anyone's expectations. The mines operated legally now, with fair shares going to workers and legitimate owners alike. The new courthouse handled disputes with transparency and equality. Most importantly, the people had learned to stand together against corruption. She closed the Bible gently, knowing that future generations would read these pages and understand the price of justice and the power of truth to overcome even the darkest lies. James Cooper's legacy lived on, not just in bronze plaques and written laws, but in the heart of the community he had died protecting. Black Rock had found something more precious than gold in its mines. It had found its soul.